Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the new LORAC Pro Palettes, and we're going to do kind of a deep dive on these, so get comfortable. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but when I showed these in my haul video on Sunday and also some swatches on Instagram, I started getting a ton of questions and requests about these palettes, so I'm going to try to cover all of your questions in today's video. We're going to be doing comparisons. I'm going to be talking about the new formula versus the old one. I'm going to be showing some of the old palette swatches next to these because this particular palette is actually shades from all the other LORAC Pro palettes kind of put in one. So we're going to be talking about those as well. I have a couple of looks to show you guys. So there's just a ton of information that's going to be in this video. I will put timestamps down in the description box below, and also those should translate to the little bar across the bottom of your screens. So if you hover over that, you should be able to see the different sections of the video and what I'm talking about when. I just find that that might be a little bit easier if you don't really care about certain things. You could always just jump to the things that you do want to see. And of course, as always, if you do have the time and you can watch my whole video through, I really appreciate it because that helps in the algorithm and it makes YouTube share my video more with new people. So that always helps me out a lot, the longer you can watch a video. But of course, I understand we're all busy and a lot of this might not appeal to you. So that's why I'm doing the timestamps. So out of the new Pro palettes, I ended up getting 3 of them. I got Noir and Soleil, which are 18 shades and $35 each, which I think is a really great price for 18 shades. It's a lot lower than some of the other higher end brands. And then you also have the Artist Edition, which is $45 for 25 shades. So also a really good price. And for today's video, I'm going to go ahead and flip the camera around and do kind of a bird's eye view so that you can really focus on the palettes themselves. So let's go ahead and jump into the video and I'll meet you back here with my final thoughts at the end. All right, guys, so let's start out with Noir first, and this one seems to be the most popular with all of you just because it has a little bit more of a cool tone vibe going on, but as you can see, it's also very warm toned. I think it's a good mix of both. A lot of the matte shades on the top row here are warm toned, and then down here you have a mix of both cool and warm shades. And this one also, as you might have noticed, it has 6 matte shades, and then the other 12 are shimmer. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention in case you are more of a matte eyeshadow person. This one's really heavy on the shimmer shades. Also, I wanted to mention that this palette does have a mirror, but I've covered it up with the shade names just because they're not anywhere else on the palette. They're not on the back, they're not printed here, and I just wanted to keep those in case I need to reference anything, so that's just why I have this stuck up here. I also wanted to point out with all of these palettes, if you turn it over like this, there are little holes in the back and they come with this little key, and what you do is you can just pop these shades out with this and rearrange them. You can add them to a different palette and mix and match and kind of create your own custom palette. So I think that's a really cool feature of these palettes. Some palettes do have magnetic pans, but you kind of have to like stick something in there and lift them out. And I think, you know, having this key and those little holes in the back just make it super, super easy. Another brand that's really good about that as well is Natasha Denona. She has the holes in the back. She doesn't give you a key, but you can always just take something sharp and poke it through and pop these shadows out if you wanted to. So I just think that's awesome. So let's go ahead now and do some swatches and then we'll talk a little bit about the formula. So first up we have the shade Ecru. And this one is Soft Taupe, Sable, Burgundy, Smoke, and Ink. So those are all of the matte shades in this palette. Then we have the shade White Diamond. This one feels more like a topper. It's not a full-on shimmer shade. It is a little bit sheer. Next we have Whisper. This one is a super smooth shimmer shade. And then this one is Primrose, also a super buttery shimmer shade. This one is Lust, Silver Moon, and Rendezvous. This one is also more like a topper, similar to this one here. Then we have Stardust. This one's also kind of a topper-like formula. It's not quite as buttery or creamy as the regular shimmer shades are. Then we have Dahlia. This one is a traditional shimmer shade. Then we have Whiskey. This one's also a regular shimmer. Onyx, also a regular shimmer. Then we have Majestic. This one is more like a topper also.
And then last but not least, we have Black Violet. This one is a regular shimmer shade. So as I mentioned while swatching, there are definitely two different types of shimmer shades in this palette. We have the ones like this and like some of the ones here that are really rich, creamy. They have a super luxurious feel to them. And then you have the four topper shades. We have White Diamond, Majestic, Rendezvous, and Stardust. And those, they are soft, but they're not as soft. They don't have the buttery feel. They feel a little more firmly pressed into the pan. They're a little bit more difficult to pick up. So I don't think that they put down quite as much color, but they are still really pigmented at the same time. I don't know if you can see if I go more close up, but look at like White Diamond next to these two shimmer shades, and you can see that it has a little bit of micro glitter in it. Same thing with this one and this one. You can see like the tiny little micro glitters. The other ones are very metallic, but I don't see little pieces of glitter in them. They're very shiny, very foiled, but they don't have the glitter. And that's one thing about the Noir palette that kind of sets it apart from the Soleil one, which I'm going to show you in a second, because I think they tried to include these more glittery toppers because the Noir palette is more like of a going out kind of palette. It's more of an evening palette. So if you're somebody who doesn't like these topper type shades that have the micro glitter, then I just wanted to point this out because there are four of them in this palette. So when it comes to dupes for the Noir palette, the most requested one by far was the new Natasha Denona GLAM palette. So I wanted to do some quick comparison swatches for you guys. Looking at the two side by side, what stands out to me the most are the matte shades in the LORAC palette look way warmer than the GLAM palette. These are all, for the most part, cool toned, and the LORAC palette has kind of a mix of both warm and cool, but I do think a lot of the shimmer shades look like they're going to be really similar in the pan. So let's go ahead and check it out. So I couldn't fit the whole palette on my arm, so I'm going to break it up shimmers and mattes. So here are the shimmer shades, and honestly, they're very, very close. They're not exact shade for shade dupes, but if you already have the GLAM palette, I feel like these are close enough that you really don't need the LORAC. And then when it comes to the matte shades, again, they're similar, but not exact. Here you have a black in the LORAC, and this one is more of like a deep charcoal gray. I think these browns look really similar. These two look really nothing alike. These are close, but this one's a little warmer. This one's a little more cool and grayish. And then the ivory shades are pretty similar. I think the one in the LORAC palette is a little bit lighter. And then of course you have this reddish matte shade from the LORAC palette that you don't have in the GLAM palette. So I do think the formulas feel pretty comparable. Both are very, very smooth and pigmented. So really, I think if you already purchased the GLAM palette, I would probably go ahead and skip the LORAC Noir. I think they're just so close. Next up we have Soleil, and this one also has 18 shades just like Noir, but this one has more matte shades. You have 9 mattes and then 9 shimmers, and this one is definitely more of a warm tone palette. So let's go ahead and do some swatches. First up we have Warm Vanilla, Pink Beige, Nectar, Sand Dune, Morocco, Cinnamon, Red Cedar, Saffron, and then we have Ash Brown. For the shimmer shades, we have Opal, Soft Pearl, Aurora, Quartz, Mirage, Desert Rose. This one is a topper-like shade, but it's the only one in this palette. Mojave, Warm Honey, and Euphoria. So with this palette, you have all very creamy, buttery shimmer shades, except for this one right here. And I think the first 5 here are very, very shimmery and metallic. And then these last 3 deeper ones are not quite as much. I feel like they're a little bit more toned down. The matte shades are really, really beautiful. You have a couple of deeper options. You also have some lighter ones down this end and some great midtones for crease colors as well. So overall, I think this is a really beautiful warm tone palette. I love that it doesn't have a lot of red in it because I know a lot of warm tone palettes do, and I'm not really a fan of red eyeshadows, so I like that they stuck to more of the warmer browns and oranges. And then when it comes to dupes for the Soleil palette, this was hard because this looks like a lot of other warm tone palettes I already have in my collection, and we could probably spend all day going through different palettes that I think are similar. So I just went with the one that I got the most requests for, and this one is the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. So again, just like last time, I'm going to split it up mattes and shimmers. So we have the bronze palette on the top top row and then the Soleil palette on the bottom. And I actually think these are closer than I thought they would be just from looking at them in the pan. And interestingly, even though the Soleil is more of a warm tone palette, I thought that this brown looked really cool once it was swatched out. And then here are the shimmer shades, and just like with the GLAM palette and Noir, there aren't a lot of exact shade for shade dupes, but I think if you already have the bronze palette, I think you have the same vibe as Soleil. I do really think you guys have a good eye for spotting these dupes, because I wouldn't have thought that these two were this close looking at them in the pan. But I really think once you put a lot of these shades on your eyes, they're going to look almost identical. And then last but not least, we have the Pro Palette Artist Edition. It's called Meraki. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. This one has 25 shades as opposed to 18, so it's a little bit larger. You have 10 shimmers, 15 mattes, and this one is supposed to be a collection of some of the more popular shades from all of their different Pro Palettes. I do have quite a few of their Pro Palettes, so I'll be able to do some comparisons in a little bit, but first let's go ahead and swatch these shades. All right, so first we have the shade Cream. This one is from the original Pro palette. Next up is Sand, and this one is from the original Mega Pro palette number 1. Then we have Canvas. This one is from the Pro palette number 3. Brulee is from Pro palette number 4. Light Brown is from Pro palette number 2. Cashmere is from Mega Pro 1. Rose is from Pro palette number 2. Candlelight is from Pro 4. Champagne is from Pro 1. Smoky Topaz is from Mega Pro 1. Cool Taupe is from Pro 3. And Terracotta is also from Pro 3. Clay is also from Pro 3. Mauve is from Pro 1. Dusty Plum is from Mega Pro 1. 3 Dimension appears to be a single shadow. I couldn't find it in any of the palettes. Gold is from the Pro 1 palette, the original. Brown Sugar is from Mega Pro 3. Rose Quartz is also from Mega Pro 3. Cocoa is from Pro 2. Corduroy is from the Pro Matte palette, which was a mini palette. Cognac is from Pro 4. Suede also appears to have been a single. Espresso is from the original Pro palette. Espresso is from the original Pro palette. And Jet Black is from Mega Pro 3. So here's the whole palette swatched out. I didn't notice any of those topper shades. All of the shimmers are really buttery and really creamy in this palette. Nothing has any micro glitter to it. Some of the shimmers are more foiled than others. Some almost look a little bit more satiny and not quite as shiny. So I think there's a really good variety of different finishes in this palette. So now I want to go ahead and do some comparisons between the shades in this palette and the shades that I just read off to you when I was doing the swatches in the other Pro palettes, because some of them are the same and some of them look completely different. So if you have other LORAC Pro palettes, I thought it was important to show the differences between the two. So first up, we have the Meraki palette next to the Pro 1. So here are the 4 shades from the Pro 1 palette, and these all look pretty similar color-wise. I think that the shimmer shades maybe just have a little bit more depth to them than the original does, especially Champagne. I noticed the biggest difference here with the shade Gold. This one, I just feel like it's maybe just a little deeper and richer, but I think that the gold in the original Pro palette was awesome as well. And then we have Mauve and Espresso with the matte shades, and I think both of these in the new palette just look smoother in a swatch. They felt a little bit smoother. These were more on the powdery side. Next up, there are 3 shades from the Pro 2 palette. So we have light brown, rosé, and cocoa. And I think light brown looks a little bit different. In the Pro 2 palette, it's kind of more of a taupe, whereas it's a little bit more of a yellowy brown in the new palette. I think that rosé looks basically the same. It felt exactly the same. The one in the original Pro 2 is very creamy and buttery. And then we have cocoa. Now this one, while they look very similar in a swatch, they felt completely different. Cocoa in the original palette felt a little bit drier and almost like one of those matte shades with micro glitter in it. It was a little creamier than that. I think it is technically a shimmer shade, but it's more on the satiny side. It was kind of like satin with a little micro glitter. This one also has the micro glitter, but it's a full-on like creamy buttery shimmer shade, so they just have a completely different texture. Next up, we have 4 matte shades from the Pro 3 palette. This one is one of my favorites. So the 4 matte shades we have are Canvas, Cool Taupe, Terracotta, and Clay. So as you'll notice, two of these shades look a lot different as far as the color goes. First off, Canvas is a little bit more yellowy in the new palette. And then we also have Clay, which is a little bit more reddish, I feel like, in the older palette. And here it's a little bit more orangey brown. So those two look a little bit different. And then formula-wise, you can kind of see in this one, Clay, right here, how there's some kick up. The old matte shades had a ton of fallout, and the new ones hardly have any. They're very, very smooth on the skin. Then we have three shades from the Pro 4 palette. I also really enjoyed this one as well. So here we have Brulee, Candlelight, and Cognac. And Brulee looks completely different, which I'm kind of bummed about because I actually liked this pink tone shade, and they made it again kind of more yellowy in the new palette. I think that Candlelight looks pretty much the same, and also they swatch pretty much the same. They both have a lot of depth to them. They also both feel really creamy and are super metallic and foiled. And then we have Cognac, which again I think is a little bit different. I feel like it has more of a pinkish undertone here, kind of similar to that one. And over here they made it more of like a yellowy or orangey warm brown. So they did also change these two shades up a bit. Next up we have Mega Pro 3. This one shares 3 shades with the new palette. So here we have Brown Sugar, Rose Quartz, and Jet Black. Jet Black I feel like is the same. Again, I just think the new palette, it's a lot smoother. This one had a lot more kick up and it just didn't swatch quite as well. It was a little patchy. And Rose Quartz and Brown Sugar, I think in the older palette, they feel the same. The texture's the same, very buttery and creamy again. But I think the new ones are just slightly deeper and richer versions of the older ones. So that's just something to note as well. And then last but not least, we have the Pro Matte Palette, which was a smaller 8-pan, and this one shares 1 shade with the new one. So this is the shade Corduroy. I think they're pretty close, but I feel like the old one was maybe slightly more cool toned. This one again has kind of a little like maybe green or yellow to it. It's slightly different and again, very smooth compared to the original. Not that this one wasn't smooth, but it was just more powdery with a ton of fallout. So those are all the comparisons I have. Unfortunately, I don't own the Mega Pro 1 or the 2 singles that I mentioned, but I think this gives you a pretty good idea. I think I covered most of them. The Mega Pro 1 only had 4 matches, and then there were 2 singles. So there's only 6 shades we weren't able to compare, but overall, I think that most of them compare pretty well color-wise. There were a few that were a little bit off though, so I just wanted to show that to you guys in case you own some of the other Pro palettes. All right, guys, so now that we've seen all the swatches, I want to highlight the differences between the old formula versus the new formula. So let's start with the matte shades. And starting in the old palette, I'm going to dip into the shade Terracotta with my Refer number 16 brush. This is the one that I would normally use to apply eyeshadow to my crease. So as I start to apply this to my skin, you'll see that it does blend out really nicely, but at the same time, it tends to blend away. The more I run the brush back and forth, it starts to fade, and there's a lot of powdery kick up to this as well. So as I'm blending it, the color seems to get less noticeable and less pigmented, and that's just kind of the nature of these LORAC shadows from the previous palettes. They are very, very blendable. You do kind of have to build these up a little bit to get the true color that you see in the pan. And then for the new palette, I'm going to be dipping into the shade Morocco, which is a very similar shade. And as I'm applying this to my skin, I don't know if you guys can tell already that it's going on so much smoother. It has better adherence to my skin as well. I don't feel like it's blending away, yet it's still ultra blendable. It's just as blendable as the original formula, but it's just sticking to my skin better. These are very similar colors, but I think this one is just showing up a lot more. It also looks a lot smoother, almost like it's becoming one with my skin. This one looks a little bit more patchy. So for me, as far as the mattes are concerned, I think the new formula is a definite upgrade. And then when it comes to the shimmer shades in the older Pro palettes, most of them had more of a satiny finish versus a more metallic or foiled finish to them. So for example, I'm going to pick up the shade Light Pewter. And I'm just going to swatch that. So as you can see, there's definitely a sheen to it. It's very, very smooth and has a buttery feel. But then if I pick up the shade Opal in the new palette, which is also kind of a silvery shade, you'll see the difference where this one is also very creamy, very buttery, but it has a lot more of a metallic finish to it. It's just a little bit shinier on the eyes, which is definitely more of a modern look. I think a lot of eyeshadow users these days are looking for something like this. If you have a more mature eye, or if you have texture on your eyelids that you don't want to highlight, I think the original formula was probably better just because it looked a little bit smoother, and something that has a more metallic finish like this is definitely going to highlight that texture a little bit more. But I did want to mention too that not all of the shades in the original Pro palettes were more of a satiny finish. Some of them were actually very intense. Take for example the shade Candlelight from the Pro 4. So I'll just swatch this one down here. As you can see, this one is also super foiled, even more so I think than this one in the new palettes. And then you have Candlelight in the Meraki palette. So as you can see, this one swatches very similar to the old one. I think there's slightly different colors, but you can kind of get a good idea of how similar they are. So they kept something similar to the old formula when it came to these metallic shades. They just switched out all of these more satiny ones. So really all of the shimmer shades in the new palettes look more like this than like that. Alright guys, so now I just wanted to quickly show you two looks that I did, one with each of these palettes. I didn't get a chance to do a look with the artist palette, but hopefully I can do one soon and either put it on Instagram or in an update video here on YouTube. So let's start out first with Soleil. So for the look that you're going to see, I used the shade Sand Dune in my crease. Then I deepened up my crease with Ash Brown down here. And then on my lid, I used the shade Mirage, which is kind of like a greenish gold. And here's the final result. Even though this is a warm tone palette, this look didn't come out particularly warm toned because of that green shade. So I think you can actually do some looks that are more neutral to cool with this palette, even though most of the shades are warm. And then for the Noir palette, which I'm actually wearing today in the video, I used the shade Soft Taupe in my crease, Sable in the outer corner, and then I used the shade Silver Moon, which is a beautiful silver, on my lid. And this one I really love as well. You have kind of the warmer crease with the cooler lid. And unfortunately with this palette, that's really all you can do. You can't do an all cool tone look because the mattes are all more on the warm tone side. But I do really like the contrast between warm and cool, and I think it came out really pretty.
Alright guys, so I do have some final thoughts on these palettes, so let's start with the pros first. I think the price for these is really good. I do really enjoy the formula. I think it's an upgrade from the previous one. I think it's just a more updated and more modern version of the original Pro palettes. They still have the same blendability that they had before without all the crazy powderiness and fallout. I think these are very user-friendly, even though I'm not the best at blending. I didn't have trouble blending these at all. I didn't have trouble picking up the shades with my finger, so that's a good thing. I also love that you can customize these and pop the shadows out so easily and put them into a different palette or rearrange them how you like it. So I love that feature about it as well. I just think overall they did a really, really great job. And as far as the negatives go, I don't think they're really that big a deal. The first one is that the packaging has kind of like this rubberized texture. And I found that even though I just got these palettes, they already look really dirty. And then the Pro palette one, it actually, because it has the silver packaging, it scratches really easily. I don't even remember really scratching this. I don't have long nails, but it does have scratches in the silver already, so they just kind of look beat up, and I just got these. So I feel like the packaging, if you like to keep your packaging really neat looking, these are probably not going to be the best. And even though I generally enjoy this new formula, I'm not really a big fan of those topper shades that are in the Noir palette. There's also one in Soleil. I don't know why companies are putting those into palettes these days. I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm not somebody who likes to wear glitter on my eyes, but I also just enjoy a really buttery, creamy shimmer shade, and these are just not that texture. I feel like I really have to like dig my finger into the pan just to get color, and I know you're supposed to be topping another shade with them, but I kind of feel like what's the point? If you just have a really good, beautiful metallic shimmer shade, you should just be able to put one down and that's it, like a one and done type of thing. So I guess I'm not really into toppers, so that's why I wasn't a fan of those. And I'm not really crazy about the fact that there's 4 of them in this palette. If it was one like the Soleil, I think I could deal with that fine, but to use up 4 shades for those kind of stinks with this palette. I wish they would have just replaced those with matte shades so that this one had a few more mattes. Also, I wish that they would have kept this one completely cool toned because we have a solid warm toned option right here. So it would have been nice if they had done like cool toned, warm tone. And then one more criticism I have is something that I think I've heard echoed across the internet when talking about these palettes, and that is that the color stories are just a little more boring and basic. And you know, a lot of people feel like we already have these colors in our collections already, but I think, you know, LORAC redoing their Pro palettes, they wanted to have like some basic color stories just to start out with, like some core palettes. I'm pretty sure that now that they've established this core collection, they'll probably start to get more adventurous with their color stories down the road, like they did with the original Pro palettes and the Mega Pros. So I think this was just supposed to be like the base collection, and I'm guessing it's going to expand from here. So if you weren't crazy about these color stories, keep an eye out because it's a really, really great formula. And if you do end up seeing a color story you like down the road, I think they're definitely worth a purchase. All right, guys, so that's everything. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If there's any questions that you have that I didn't cover, please let me know down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. I always try to answer all of your questions when I can. So thank you all so much for watching and hanging out with me today. I really appreciate it. And if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And also, if you aren't subscribed to my channel yet, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button right in the corner of your screen. And that way you won't miss any future videos. Thanks, guys, and I will see you in my next one. Take care. Bye.